Hello and welcome. Today we'll be looking at the archetypes of Wilds of Eldraine, and most of all we are going to look at the lore of those archetypes. Here we will focus on the lore, but I know that there are a lot more, well, probably other channels that will be looking at the mechanics, but I just looked at the good ones. So let's start with the strongest ones, as no one wants to look at the top 5. That starts with the weakest one. The first one being Celebrations, Boros, where Ash is showing off the power of celebrating, where it says whenever Ash attacks, if you activated Celebration, which means that 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield this turn, you put a +1 counter on Ash. So with every celebration, Ash is getting power, probably because Ash is getting the admiration from the other people and is getting a higher standing in court, I think. And then we see Imodane's Recruiter, who is a great enabler of this mechanic. So that is the second theme that we are looking at for this archetype, which is to create 2 or more permanents in some way. In this case, creating 2 2/2s when Imodane's Recruiter is training the troops. Now, looking at this mechanic, we see the 2 types of ways people are celebrating. So simply put, we see, for example, Armory Mice, who get to celebrate whenever there are 2 or more non-land permanents in play, meaning that Armory Mice gets 2 toughness this turn. Now there is Hopeful Vigil, which is a nice enabler, but is also telling us a lot about the lore around celebration. So for example, the Hopeful Vigil is someone waiting for another night, I think, to return, because when the Hopeful Vigil enters the battlefield, you get the 2/2. And then when you stop being hopeful, you can sacrifice it and get the knowledge. But at first, we get 2 permanents onto the battlefield for just 2 mana, being a great enabler here. Also giving you a 2/2 for 2 mana, which is not the worst thing to start off with. And we are learning that at least the fact that this knight is waiting for her knight is giving us a lot of hope, and therefore is cause for a celebration of sorts. So not all things are really happy, but they can also be just a slight way of being in a celebration. Now we have a returning word, which is Townville or Toonville, which is a place where the tree folk live. But also apparently there is at least one fairy there saying, "Weary traveler, follow me. The night is a cage and my light is the key." Showing you probably towards a celebration, I am guessing. For when Townville Guide enters, she gives +1/+0 and lifelink for people that are crossing her forest. We have a small, kind of cute story where we have the Songbird's Blessing against the Knight of Doves, where you see that the Songbird's Blessing says whenever enchanted creature attacks, you may look for an aura card, you may put that card onto the battlefield. If you don't, put it into your hand. And then the Knight of Doves, who is sort of working with the, I guess, white version of these birds, says whenever an enchantment you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you create one of the birds. And says, "So many birds, yet the air was still and empty of song. Part of Sir Damon knew something wasn't right, but it was a far-off worry, unimportant and soon forgotten." I feel like there's a story here, because these are the only 2 like bird cards here. But we'll need to look into this further. Also, the Songbird's Blessing is working with the theme of fairy tale princess being surrounded with tiny animals. Now, around celebration, there is one theme, which is the goblins fighting the dwarves. And here we have 2 of the dwarves. Most important, the Gallant Pie Wielder, which is a great sort of payoff for the celebration, because Gallant Pie Wielder gets double strike whenever you get 2 or more non-permanents entering this turn. Making him extra powerful, or at least 4 powered. And we have the Skewer Slinger, skewers being a small theme in this set as well, but not really putting itself in celebration necessarily. But this one sort of is, because it's a dwarf that is fighting around with the food. And then we have the food fight itself, which says artifacts you control have become food, basically. And it deals, you can sacrifice it for 2 and then it deals damage to any target equal 1 plus the number of permanents named food fight you control. So you want a bunch of these, making it a very fun way to sacrifice your food, and making it deal 1, maybe 2, or wait, making it deal at least 2, and then 3, 4, or 5, probably. But the fun thing about this mostly is the fact that the goblins and the dwarves have been at war and they are mostly fighting with food. And we'll see soon how that ends up with them. But we have some more celebrations here. The mice are a sub-theme here that is apart from the rats, but the mice are more about the celebrations and fighting with the knights of Eldraine. This one saying at the beginning of combat, if 2 or more, if you have celebration, target creature gets +1/+1, so not a very big thing, but it also says the second spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast, which is a great enabler for the celebration. Then doesn't seem like this ogre is celebrating, but the goblins on the goblin side are celebrating as well, saying at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you celebrate, target creature gets +1/+0 and menace. The bespoke battle garb is going onto someone, probably because if you are celebrating, you want to wear nice armor, I think. Now, I want to get a little bit more into Ash, the party crasher, because we see 2 things. For one, Ash is saving someone very important, who we will see in a little bit. It might be a dragon. And we have Stroke of Midnight, which interests me a lot, because apparently at midnight, when the clock hits, let's say the assembled partygoers fell silent and stared, and we are wondering what they are looking at. So I zoomed in on this, and I think we are seeing here a little bit of whiskers, meaning that Ash might be turning into a fox like many of the elves do. But I'm not sure, but it seems like it. Now we have one other shapeshifter who is Godric, the Cloaked Reveler, and Godric can turn into a dragon. We see this here as long as you have a celebration. This turn, Godric is a dragon with fire breathing, meaning pay 1 red mana to get a power, and do this as many times as you'd like. We have some more things that are playing around the theme of celebration, but not really telling a lot. There is a small story here with it takes a lot to pull a master blacksmith from their work, but Maurice couldn't pass up an invitation to a lavish Delverho feast. And Delverho is a thing we might have to remember for Eldraine, for being the party town where a bunch of dwarves and goblins are fighting. We see it here as well, the Assault on Delverho, which is a book where we see the dwarves and the goblins fighting here for slaying dozens of redcaps using only fruit and cakes. The dwarven survivors were dubbed the Gluttoneers. And then saying the feud between dwarves and redcaps, being the goblins, raged for so long that no one could quite recall how it started. Few would believe it was sparked by a long ago dispute over a spoon. And this is because the dwarves are very much holding their grudges, and the goblins can get very angry over losing their artifacts. So I do believe it. Now moving on to red-black, which is the color pair of rats. Now 2 uncommons here, sort of noting the 2 themes that we have in the red deck, which is Totentons, the human warlock that is catching the rats basically, but is mostly on their side, saying among the rats he found the acceptance the humans would never give him. And Totentons also creates some 1/1 rats and gives them Death Touch. And the other theme is Lord Skidder, who is mostly eating humans, so not really accepting of humans, but accepting of Totentons in a weird symbiotic relationship where they both like rats. Fun little thing about Lord Skidder's butcher is that he's practicing on a piece of paper with a human there, sort of learning about their anatomy or how to eat them, I think. So these are the two themes, starting with Lord Skitter and their deal, so to say. We have oppression, saying the human world will fall, whispered the monstrous rat, Lord Skitter. You have but one choice to make, will you fall with it? And this person might not, but we know that Totentans will. And then Lord Skitter also is here seen with all of his rats, and we see Lord Skitter in a bunch of strong, even standard decks. But in draft, of course, you will want Lord Skitter because this is one of the best archetypes, and this is one of the best cards in it. Whenever another rat enters the battlefield under your control, you exile a card from your opponent's graveyard, which is better than you might think. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you create a 1/1 rat that cannot block, but is great for attacking. The blessing of Lord Skitter's Lord Skitter says that whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a wicked Gruul token onto a creature, which is a +1/+1. And when the creature dies together with the aura, each opponent loses a life. And then at the beginning of your draw step, if you control an enchanted creature, which you will with Lord Skitter's blessing, hopefully, you lose a life and you draw an additional card, being a sort of Phyrexian Arena for just 2 mana with just a small downside, showing us how important it is that Lord Skitter and Totentans have come together to fight the humans. Now I wonder what Lord Skitter is giving here really, but Totentans is gladly accepting it. And sort of showing that Totentans has more of the mice on his side, while Lord Skitter might be more of the evil looking rat type. And one fun card here is Rat Out, where we have Totentans ratting out someone on a ship, I believe. Hold this for me, throwing a rat, flavorfully giving -1/-1 for the 1/1 rat, and creating a rat for you. Now there are some more things. One small theme is the witches that work well with rats, mostly around the enchantments that die, but that really works with Lord Skitter's blessing, for example. Then we have the Tangled Colony, which is a very scary theme of rats becoming tangled up and then having to kill each other, but these ones are working together. But when it does die, then you will be left with a bunch of rats with slightly smaller tails. And we have the Voracious Vermin, showing us that rats might begin to stand on their hind legs. Lord Skitter promised the starving rats of Edgewall Keep, being notably an important place with an inn sitting in a tree, that they would never go hungry again, feeding them humans probably. On the rat side, we see more of a maybe working together of rats with other species, not in Ratcatcher's trainee, but the rats seem to be walking all over her, so maybe the Ratcatcher really doesn't want to really stop the rats. She seems to be catching them and then letting them free. We have Gnawing Crescendo of the rats working together under Totentans' leadership, whose song had no lyrics, but the rats understood it nonetheless. You own this land, it said. You deserve the feast. Also bringing rats back whenever a creature dies. And then the Edgewall pack is a rat leading a pack of dogs that enters the battlefield with a rat together with the 3 dogs, I guess. Notably for the 3/3. We have the Tethered Ratter, which is a human that also doesn't like humans. What's that, Snappers? Yes, you're right. It was very rude of the innkeeper to throw us out. Seems like these rats are really around the inn and around Edgewall, and they have their own place as well. And we have another song of Totentans, which says townsfolk tap their feet and hunt along, unwittingly amplifying the tune that would summon their doom. Funny that the humans think this dance is nice now that Totentans has become exile. We have another theme, which is the black and green one. Here we see what they exist from. what makes them. We have a theme around a city or town made of candy. And Greta's Sweet Tooth Scourge is really fighting these monsters, while, for example, Gingerbread Hunter is hunting the cookies. The cookies seem to be on sort of the good side, while the candy seems to be on the bad side, like we see with this apple. I feel like it's very clear that they meant for these to be, well, angry food. Greta makes you eat one of them, but another theme in here is sacrificing the food to make, for example, Greta stronger, but also give you other benefits. Or, for example, paying 2 to draw a card and lose you life. Now, the first theme here is that the food, the candy, might be eating you more than anything. For example, the witch might turn you into a pie again. Like in the previous set, we have the Sugar Rush, which is a rush of multiple monsters, cookies as well, so they can be evil. Like we see here, Greta saying, "Ready your weapons, I smell frosting." And then the candy Grapple, which is an apple grabbing and your arm and poisoning you, or well, not really poisoning you, but venoming you. Well, what are they saying? I don't know. Someone explain please what the difference between poisonous and venomous is. But okay, we have a different kind here as well, which says, what first seems like a ridiculous and vaguely demeaning task quickly turns into a vicious struggle for survival. Sort of saying probably they got the mission to stab a bunch of cakes and then it became a cool battle for them. Back for seconds, showing us Greta again, sort of more in an adult fashion it seems, taking someone out of the jelly, which is still something that we use in Magic the Gathering to hold people up in. We do see another of these worms here in the background, so they do need to move pretty quickly if they want to survive. Then there are a bunch more monsters and also this witch, which is leaving a trail of candy, sort of the other way around for people to follow her. Then we have the Minstrosity, which is a bunch of candy canes, and you do know that they can get pretty sharp when you have been suckling on them a little bit too much, and this is showing that pretty beautifully. And then we have the Scream Puff. You don't want to eat too much of that because you will get tummy aches. Now we have a tough cookie who is fighting the other candy, so not all of them are bad. This is a 2/2 that also can be sacrificed as a food, but you probably won't want to do that. Then we have the story about being welcomed to Sweet Tooth. Well, you will be welcomed as a 1/1 human. You will also be at the same time welcomed as food for the other food. It's a bit strange. Then it says put X+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of foods you control. So the more food you have, the stronger you become, because this human might fight them all and then might survive, or as we see here, they might not survive at all. With the Devouring Sugar Maw requiring at least one human to be sacrificed to it at all times, or maybe one of these sugar worms might want to be fed this time. We have one important cookie who is Sir Ginger, the meal ender, really ending the meal of the whole city, I suppose. And some other things that are stopping them, but for example, Sir Ginger says that she has trample, hexproof and haste as long as the opponent has a planeswalker. I thought that Sir Ginger might be fighting Ashok, but that wasn't the case. So we are still left to look at who will be fought, but maybe it is the Huntsman who we saw in the previous set. Then she says whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, she becomes stronger. So she does want the meal to continue, it seems, and you scry one. You can also eat her. Night of the Sweet's Revenge is a joke on Sweet Revenge, where it says it ends the battlefield, you create a food, not really strong for 4 mana yet, but foods you control can also be tapped for green mana, and that is really strong. Sort of saying that they are recharging maybe and wanting to attack again. Then for 7 mana you can say that creatures you control get +X for every bit of food you have. I still feel like this means that you are eating the food and getting stronger because of it. But we also have Hollow Scavenger, who is ruefully eating a cookie, I suppose. Raiding a bakery for 1 mana to create a food, and then for 1 mana again you can sacrifice that food to give the wolf +2/+2. And there was a wolf before in Throne of Eldraine that also got +2/+2, I believe, for every food they ate. Now we are moving on to the little bit weaker variances of archetypes on Eldraine, but still playable. We have Blue and Red, which is all about Johan, and I really like that this is such a small story. But the whole thing is that Johan is learning to use elemental magic, and he is making, for example, water elementals and then trying to fix them with the fire elementals. That is all that we are seeing here. The theme works around instants and sorceries, and Johan is really spell slinging them in quick succession to try to fix the problems he made himself. Johan says you may look at the top card of your library anytime, something noting that is all around the chaos of casting magic, looking at the top of your library and then randomly casting the instants or sorceries from the top of your library. Johan also says what I said. Okay, first I'll calm the elementals, then I'll put out the fire, then I'll unflood the basement, then I'll do the chores myself. So really he learned that using elemental magic isn't the only way to solve your problems. It might even be a way to make more problems. One important thing as well is we have an altar wizard. Now, we see a lot of elementals, for example the Hearth elemental, which probably has been made by Johan himself as well. Then we see Johan trying to fix his problems in most of these cards, for example with the stopgap, which says to return non-land permanent to its owner's hand, so not really stopping the problem forever, but it might be a good temporary solution against it, for the elemental to stay in there for 1 second, and then the next turn they might return. We have a quick study showing us that Johan can learn that, for example, from these problems he learns that keeping books in the cauldron isn't such a bad idea. Now we're moving on, for example the Apprentice's Folly, I think. Let me move back. Yeah, Johan was an apprentice as well in the name. So the Apprentice's Folly, showing that putting fire and water together doesn't really solve the problem immediately. Saying choose target non-token creature you control that doesn't have the same name as the token you control, and making a copy of it. So just really doubling his own problems is basically what we are seeing here. Then Frantic Firebolt is saying for 3 mana you do X damage, which is 2 plus the number of cards, instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard or adventures. Johan's conjecture about Draconic Fire dispelling rainwater elementals proved to be correct. Now he just needed a way to dispel Draconic Fire. So really showing us how he is making more problems. We have Scalding Viper, which says Steam Clean, showing us that Johan used this magic to try to steam clean his house, which does work, but also destroys it a little bit. Seeing how they froze the lamps seemingly and are throwing out the books. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value 3 or less, the Scalding Viper deals 1 damage to the player. So whenever he makes more elementals, this problem is getting worse. Then we have some other ones that aren't really with Johan per se, but they are still in the house, for example here, and in the library here. Showing us some more kinds of elementals. And this one is really cute as well, with the fireballs wanting to get into the catapult to be shot. An autonomous self-loading catapult had seemed like such a good idea. Don't know why that would help you with your chores, but apparently it does. And then Immodane isn't in theme, but is shown around Embereth, it seems. And it says the realm needs a ruler, not a boy. We know that Immodane has been fighting Will, and says whenever an instant or sorcery targets a single creature, Immodane deals that much damage to each opponent. Oh, so for every damage that is dealt to the creature. We have one more theme that is not really in it, but we have the giants, which say counter a spell with mana value 4 or greater. Mana value 4 or greater is a theme for the giants more than anything, but they work well with spells as well, so I included them here too. And we have the Restless Spire, which again shows us the red and blue elementals now growing around the tower, and it might not stand long as we are seeing how it is being toppled over. We have a few more. The Splashy Spellcaster is destroying the library here. And then we have Gatwick's First Jewel, which I found fun more than anything and wanted to share, which says or tells us about Gatwick's First Jewel. Gatwick being the, I think, most important mage of Ventress, saying create a cursed roll token attached to up to 1 target creature. So apparently Gatwick was cursed some while ago. Then Scry 2 showing us how Gatwick was trying to find a solution to his problem. And then when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell with mana value 3 or less, again, copy the spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. So Gatwick really showing he has mastered the art of jewel casting after looking for answers. Now Black-White is an interesting theme as well, because here we see Asha coming back in this theme. And other than that, we see a lot of people being stalked by their nightmares, also showing how Ashiok is influencing this world. Neva is stalked by nightmares, but also is learning from them and is becoming stronger because of them. So Neva might be interesting to Ashiok, but we haven't really seen them talk too much. Neva is a 4 mana 2/2 with menace. Not bad, but not good. When Neva enters the battlefield, return target creature or enchantment card from the graveyard to your hand. Still not too good, but whenever an enchantment is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1 counter on Neva, then scry 1. Now that is interesting, because that is exactly the same thing that Ashok's Reaper does. Whenever an enchantment you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. Well, not the same thing. Drawing a card and scrying are very different, but they're triggering on the same thing, sort of showing us that whenever a nightmare is performed, they are being stronger. Neva because she is defeating her nightmares and becoming stronger because of it, and Ashok's Reaper because of the reaping of the nightmares. Now moving on, we have another small theme here, which is around Ariette and sort of these witches with these weird colors showing us their real natures. We have Ariette, who says each creature that's enchanted by an aura you control can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. Sort of goading them, I guess. Or at least stopping them from attacking you. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of auras you control. So while you are stopping your opponents from attacking you, you are draining them slowly. Which was Ariette's plan of making everyone fall asleep and then getting all of that power for herself. Her Whisper says target opponent discards 2 cards, which is interesting as we'll see in a little bit. And then we have the Spiteful Hexmage, which is working with the same theme of the weird color around his neck, not really showing another face, but the same one, it seems, as the cracked mirror around Ariette. Maybe, I don't know, her brother, because he says you'll never amount to anything now, father. I'm guessing so. Now, moving on with the Ashiok theme, we have Wicked Visitor, Taken by Nightmares, and Hopeless Nightmare, which are all around this theme of enchantments and them having them, for example, with Taken by Nightmares, for you to scry 2. Wicked Visitor saying whenever an enchantment you control is put into the graveyard, each opponent loses a life. Sort of, as it is a common, I think, in draft, you will be able to use this a lot. And it might be very annoying for your opponents, but it is a very stable enabler for you. So I think this card is most of all making this theme usable, at least. Then we have Hopeless Nightmare, which says enter the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. So this one wants to be sacrificed, and we see a few of them, the enchantments that want to be sacrificed. And when you do, you scry 2. Sort of like what we saw in Pharaohs, which is interesting because they all seem to be nightmares because of that. And with Theros, it was with the gods that all got a card like this one. Entering with a small effect and then enabling you to sacrifice them for a second. Now moving on, we have a small extra theme which was about the rats, which is interlinked here because the Sewer Witch says when she enters the battlefield you create a rat, and then for each rat you control you create a wicked roll token attached to that rat. Only on the ETB, so it won't work again and again, which is a shame because otherwise she would be a combo enabler, but also not a shame because that would be really strong. Then we have Warehouse Tabby, sort of not knowing what is about to happen, but seemingly maybe a little bit stressed. Working with the rats as well and saying whenever an enchantment you control is put into the graveyard, you do gain a 1/1 rat. So this would have been a combo almost. And one more thing that we see is the reflection. Conceited Witch not wanting to see her reflection because it would show a real self. And interestingly, we see the apple as well, the cursed apple that we saw with Henriette. Now on the white side of things, we have wanting or maybe becoming stronger when a curse is lifted. For example, Dutiful Griffin is waiting for their knight to awaken so that she can hunt again. It's a 5 mana 4/4 with flying. Not too bad, it's just a water elemental. But then for 3 mana, you can return it to your hand. You only have to sacrifice 2 enchantments with it. But white doesn't care about that always, because for example you have for 3 mana the Cursed Courtier, saying that it enters as a 1/1 because of its cursed token with lifelink. But becoming a 3/3 when the curse of being a frog is lifted and he becomes a human noble again. We also learn a bit more about Dunbarrow, I guess, but that is not for here. And we have Break the Spell, which is a 1 mana instant that might have you destroy, for example, the Cursed Roll. And if you controlled it, you draw a card. Saying as well that Hilda saved Kellen, which is a beautiful part of the story, I have to say. We have some more of this. We see the Knight of Doves, which also worked with enchantments. When they are put into the battlefield, you create a 1/1 bird. I'm feeling like it means that there is a curse around this princess. And maybe the curse is slowly being lifted and he is finding the birds, or maybe he is looking for the birds as a trail of candy, something like that. We have the Slumbering Keep card for 1 mana and 1/1. That has you scry 1 whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. And for 3 mana, it gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. As you are probably going to get a lot of enchantments, this might be a very strong fire-breathing ability. But you do need at least 3 for it to be a fire-breathing ability. But then still, pretty dangerous ability for your opponent if you are keeping it open. Savior of the Sleeping also gets stronger whenever an enchantment is leaving the battlefield, but keeps the +1 counters, being a sort of slower but stronger effect. We have one more theme here, which is a sort of sub-theme, because we see the Lich Knight's Conquest, which is for 5 mana you sacrifice, for example, enchantments, and for every artifact, enchantment or token, you return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So sort of mass reanimating, which is only good if you have a bunch of creatures in your graveyard, of course, but works with, for example, stopping all of those enchantments that you have put onto yourself. We have the Virtue of Persistence, which is showing us that the Lich Knight Conquest is a lot about the virtue of Noctwain, continuing to do whatever you do, even if you are a zombie, for example. And we have Shatter the Oath, which is a very strong story, at least, because shattering an oath for Locthwain Knights is a very, let's say, deep thing that shouldn't happen. And this one says destroy target creature or enchantment, and you create a wicked roll attached to up to 1 target creature you control. Now we have, I think, the last one, which is green and white, which is all about making your creatures stronger because of the enchantments. For example, Sir Armand is giving a monster roll token, which says +1/+1 and trample for this creature, but this becomes +2/+2 and trample because enchanted creatures you control get +1/+1. Now, this is interesting, an interesting story at least, because of the story around these elves who have been turning into foxes at midnight. So this is why I feel like Ash is turning into a fox herself as well. But it is a bit weird because Ash isn't an elf looking at her ears. But okay, maybe she is a sort of a child from them. We see an Ardenvale Knight, Sir Armand is, we know because of these circles, coming into, and we know because of these knights in the background, by the way, coming into Red Keep, the Red Keep. Now, I'm not sure what she does here, but she seems to be creating a new fox. And this fox seems to be crying because they are being cursed now as well. Or maybe the curse has been lifted, but it doesn't reflect in the mechanics then. It just seems like she's making them stronger, something like that. So I really wonder about this story. But we haven't gotten it, so I shouldn't be looking at that too much. And we have another card that works well. I've tried to make these into uncommons every time, because you are probably going to get them in draft, but don't really have to. This one says any number of target enchanted creatures you control and up to 1 target creature you control each deal damage equal to their power to target creature you don't control. So as a lot of satires can work together here to defeat the troll, that makes a beautiful story. Now, about the Red Tooth Keep, we see a few things here. We see, for example, Ferocious Werefox that can turn into a monster at midnight, becoming a guard for them. And then each night it says the elves of Red Tooth Keep transform into feral monsters, beasts. Now I wonder, because we see a fox here already, I don't think Sir Armand had brought the curse there. I don't think. But it might be that Sir Armand has saved one of them and they are not really happy with it, or maybe they are happy and we don't really see it. I'm not really sure. But we also have Red Tooth Vanguard, which says I'm just a stat lead during the day. I don't believe that, but they say whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 to return Red Tooth Vanguard back to your hand. So this is a 3/1 trampler that can return and return. Not really bad, because if you can keep doing that and your opponent can't profitably block 3 power, this can get in for a bunch of damage. Archon of the Wild Rose is showing us a bunch more of the story. For one, it says other creatures you control that are enchanted by ours you control have base power 4/4 and flying. That's really good, because let's say, for example, here we put a monstrous roll token on let's say Red Tooth Genealogist, a 2/3. The Genealogist becomes a 4/4 with flying and +1, so a 5/5 with flying. So that is really strong. But a great finisher for one, but the story under it is more important even. The curse of Red Tooth Keep could only be broken by a mystical rose that blooms in moonlight. And maybe the Archon, because Archons are keepers of order, is protecting the rose from being broken. But I don't know if the elves want the curse to be broken yet. We have the Red Tooth Genealogist, who says some family trees are thornier than others. The other thing about Red Tooth Keep are the roses that are a big theme here. We see it, for example, here in the art, and we have seen it in Throne of Eldraine 2, where the elves have used roses to gather up the blood of the humans that they defeat and make themselves and nature stronger again. Now, for example, Rena is a regent from the Red Tooth Keep, saying my people are both bloom and thorn, definitely signifying roses. And for 2 mana you may choose target enchantment you control that doesn't have the same name as another permanent you control. And you create a token that's a copy of it. So you can't have more than 2 on the battlefield, but then you can at least create a second enchantment that is doubled. I am curious because this seems to mean that Yenna is making more people into Fox. If the token is an aura, untap Yenna, then scry 2, activate only as a sorcery. So you can keep doing this with auras, basically what it is saying, but only as a sorcery, because she keeps untapping whenever you double an aura. Now I do see why you can only make 2, because that seems like an enabler again of a combo. Bestial Bloodline is the 2 mana enchantment that makes your creature +2/+2. That can easily be returned to your hand for 5 mana. There is a fierce joy in losing yourself to savagery, and a bitter pain in regaining your senses afterward. You could never understand. So I do feel like they have a sort of bitter relationship with their curse, where apparently they like to hunt, some of them at least, but they might want to return to being just elves, but I'm not sure. They did say bitter, didn't they? Yeah, and bitter pain in regaining your senses afterward. Yeah, so a weird relationship, like this relationship, where the curse of the Werefox is being told here as giving a monster role to a creature, but this knight, I think this knight fell in love with the fox anyways, saying you are no monster to me, my love, and the fox is now protecting the knight back. Yep, exiling the non-fox creature until the bodyguard leaves the battlefield. Now there is one other small theme in the enchantments where a story being told about an enchanted creature might strengthen them as well, saying enchanted creatures you control get +2/+2. So when they are playing a role in the story, they become stronger, is what this says. In the way that, for example, here you can play the young hero role, which gives you +1/+1, and a +1/+1 counter whenever you attack, as long as its toughness is 3 or less. So as long as the hero is not that tough yet, it gets a +1 counter, for example. In this case it would already get +2, so it won't work, but you understand how it works. Another small sub-theme is how you want a bunch of creatures, of course, because they all will get the effect of +2/+2, for example, there. And the wilds working well together with so many creatures. A small story theme around that is how the human knights have returned to the wilds, saying here, for example, some knights who survived the invasion have forsaken what remains of their courts. The newly formed Verdant Order has sworn to defend the last untouched parts of the wilds. And this guy who left knighthood behind to heal the scars of the invasion. We have the Pollen Shield Hare, who is also protecting the forest, saying creature tokens you control get +1/+1. Now, the really last one is Red-Green, where we see a theme around power 4 or greater, with Ruby as their main girl, I'd say. Saying whenever she attacks you and you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Ruby gets +2/+2, becoming a 3/4, which is not very big, but also showing us how Ruby is working around the theme of being sort of a werewolf, perhaps. Saying neither the sharpest thorns nor the foulest beasts would stop her from finding her brother. Thorns from Red Tooth Keep, and the wolves' fangs from Red Tooth Keep as well. These are wolves, by the way, not foxes. Picnic Ruiner also works with it, saying whenever it attacks while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, it gains double strike, becoming a 4/2. Double strike, notably being also what the dwarf with the pies did. So maybe pies give you double strike. Maybe. There are more things that work with it, but these are the only two. the Territorial Witch Stalker, which can attack when you have a power with 4 or greater, becoming a 3/3 that can attack us, so it doesn't have Defender. And the Boundary Lands Ranger, which says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a big creature, you discard a card and draw a card, sort of finding you things in the woods. Now, we have Agatha, which is a mythic, so didn't mention it at the beginning because of that. But a 2-mana 1/1 that wants to be strengthened. So we have a few cards that want to be strengthened in this theme as well. The red-green theme, saying activated abilities of creatures you control cost X less, where X is her power, and can reduce the mana, and that costs less to 1 mana to stop combos from happening. Also has her own, which says other creatures you control get +1/+1 and trample and haste until end of turn. Now, this is interesting because, of course, things can get to 2 mana to get +1/+1 every time. Sort of a weak fire breathing again. Now, Witch Stalker's Frenzy is interesting here because Agatha has made the Witch Stalker. Or not the Witch Stalker, this knight. Her champion, saying here Agatha's champion, which when it enters and you bargain something, it fights a creature as a 4/4. Being a 4/4 also enabling the theme of the Gruul archetype in the set. Witch Stalker's Frenzy, which are the wolves, actually, the Witch Stalkers, says that they circled the armored figure drawn to the corrupting stink of dark magic. While this isn't a magic user, he is being enchanted, and they notice this. Galen and Ruby fled the sound of savage howls and snapping jaws. We see how the knight is being touched as well in Witch's Mark for 2 mana, putting a Wicked Roll counter on the knight, which is why the wolves attacked the knight. And interestingly, we see behind the witch the 2 eyes of the Witch Stalkers that would attack the wolf knight because of her own wall. So kind of a beautiful art, tying this together. Now we have a few more. For example, here we have Verdant Outrider that has an ability, well, that might be just 1 green mana with Agatha, stopping it from being blocked, but it's a 4/2. And this one might very easily become 2 or even 1 mana for a +1 counter on Toadstool Admirer. And this is a very good fire breathing ability, so I like that small combo there. And then we have Redcap Gutter Dweller, which I haven't touched on before in the Black-Red Rats deck, because it is so nice here, because it starts as a 3/3 with menace, but then at the beginning of your upkeep you may sacrifice another rat, for example, and if you do, put a +1 counter on it, and exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. What I like about this one is it works with this green-red theme, becoming a 4/4. It works with the red theme because it makes 2 reds, and it also works with the celebration theme, creating itself and then 2 reds. So really love that card for being so versatile and working in all of these great decks. So I'd pick this very highly because of it. Another thing is, of course, giants often are more than 4 power, so they work well with it. And they also have their own theme of mana value 5 or greater, which doesn't really synergize directly, but often is the case that a big creature costs a lot of mana. And that was it for today. Tell me what your favorite archetype is, and we can have a bit of a conversation about it if you want. If not, don't react. And have a nice day. Bye.